Joel Ramirez never expected that pulling a waterlogged suitcase from the Missouri River would change his life forever. The 57-year-old ferry skipper was just trying to make ends meet, drowning in medical debt from his late wife's cancer treatments while watching his son's college dreams slip away. When the expensive leather case bobbed past his boat during the spring flood, Joel figured it might contain something valuable enough to help pay the bills. Instead, he discovered something that would shake him to his core. 30 years of hand-drawn birthday cards and heartfelt video messages, all addressed to "My Missing Boy" and signed by Evelyn Drake, the billionaire, hotel magnate known for her ruthless business dealings. But could this ruthless woman really be searching for her lost son all these years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the Missouri River like memories that refused to fade. Joel Ramirez stood at the helm of his ferry, Maria's dream, watching the sun struggle through the gray Kansas sky. At 57, his hands bore the calluses of 3 decades working these waters, and his weathered face told stories of storms, weathered and burdens, carried with quiet dignity. The ferry wasn't much to look at a flat-bottomed vessel that could carry maybe 12 cars on a good day, but it was honest work, and Joel had never been one to shy away from honest work. His passengers this morning were the usual mix: farmers heading to market, a few tourists who'd taken a wrong turn somewhere, and Mrs. Henderson from the county clerk's office, who rode his ferry twice a week just to have someone to talk to. "Morning, Joel," she called out, her voice carrying the particular warmth that small-town folks reserved for people they'd known half their lives. "River's running high today." "Spring melt," Joel replied, his voice carrying the measured cadence of a man who chose his words carefully. "Always happens this time of year. The water knows where it needs to go." He'd learned that philosophy from his late wife, Maria. She used to say that life was like the river, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, but always moving toward something greater. Maria had possessed a wisdom that came from facing life's challenges with grace, a quality Joel had tried to emulate in the 2 years since her passing. The ferry's engine hummed its familiar tune as Joel guided them across the wide expanse of muddy water. On the far bank, he could see his son Leo waiting with their old pickup truck, probably checking his phone for the 100th time this morning. The boy, though at 18, Joel supposed he wasn't much of a boy anymore, had inherited his mother's quick mind and his father's stubborn streak, a combination that had served him well academically, but poorly when it came to accepting help. Joel's chest tightened as he thought about the crumpled letter in Leo's back pocket. The University of Missouri had accepted him into their engineering program, a dream that had sustained the family through Maria's illness and the dark months that followed. But dreams, Joel had learned, required more than hope. They required money, and money was something the Ramirez family had precious little of these days. The medical bills for Maria's treatment had arrived like a second cancer, metastasizing through their savings and spreading into every corner of their financial life. Insurance had covered some of it, but the experimental treatments, the special medications, the countless trips to specialists in Kansas City, all of it had added up to a mountain of debt that seemed to grow larger each month. No matter how many extra hours Joel worked on the ferry, he'd taken on additional jobs when he could find them: weekend construction work, helping neighbors with their farming equipment, even selling some of Maria's handmade quilts to the antique shop in town. Each dollar earned felt like a small victory against the crushing weight of circumstance, but it was never quite enough. Leo didn't know the full extent of their financial troubles. Joel had shielded his son from the worst of it, the way a father should. The boy knew they were struggling. You couldn't hide the stack of bills on the kitchen table, or the conversations that stopped abruptly when he entered the room. But Joel had been careful not to let him see the full picture. Leo had enough. to worry about with his senior year of high school and his future stretching out before him like an uncharted river. The ferry docked with a gentle bump against the wooden pilings that Joel had installed himself 5 years ago. The passengers disembarked with the unhurried pace of rural life, exchanging pleasantries and weather observations with the practiced ease of people who knew each other's stories. This was Joel's world, small, predictable, built on relationships that stretched back generations. "Dad," Leo called out as Joel secured the ferry's moorings. Mrs. Patterson from the bank called again. "She wants to talk to you about—" "I know what she wants to talk about," Joel interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "We'll figure it out, son. We always do." Leo's jaw tightened in a way that reminded Joel painfully of Maria. She'd worn that same expression whenever she was trying to solve a problem that seemed too big for their resources. "Maybe I should take a gap year, get a job, help with." "No." The word came out harder than Joel intended. He softened his voice, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Your mother and I didn't work this hard so you could postpone your education. We'll find another way." The truth was, Joel wasn't sure there was another way. He'd already looked into a second mortgage on their small house, but the bank had politely explained that his income wasn't sufficient to qualify. He'd considered selling the ferry business, but who would buy a barely profitable operation in a world where bridges were replacing ferries and progress was measured in highway miles saved? As they drove home through the familiar streets of Riverside, Missouri population 847, on a good day Joel found himself studying the landscape with new eyes. The old brick buildings that housed the post office, the diner, and Miller's hardware store had stories etched into their foundations. Families had been built here, children raised, dreams pursued, and sometimes achieved. It was a good place to call home, even if it wasn't a place where dreams came easy. Their house sat on Elm Street, a modest 2-story structure that Maria had transformed into a home through sheer force of will and an eye for making small spaces feel welcoming. The front porch still held her rocking chair, where she'd spent countless evenings watching Leo play in the yard and talking with Joel about their plans for the future. Joel hadn't moved the chair since her death, couldn't bring himself to acknowledge that those evening conversations were just memories now. Inside, the kitchen table was set for two, the way it had been for the past 2 years. Joel had tried eating alone at the small breakfast nook, but it felt wrong somehow, like he was forgetting something important. Setting the table for two kept Maria's presence alive in small ways, and Joel needed those small ways more than he cared to admit. "I'll make dinner," Leo offered, already reaching for the package of ground beef they'd bought on sale at the grocery store. The boy had learned to cook out of necessity after Maria's death, and while his skills were improving, Joel still missed the way his wife could transform simple ingredients into something that felt like love on a plate. "I'll help," Joel said, because cooking together had become one of their rituals, a way of maintaining the family structure that had always defined their lives. As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, Joel found himself studying his son's profile. Leo had inherited Maria's delicate features and dark eyes, but there was something of Joel's own stubbornness in the set of his jaw. The boy was trying so hard to be strong, to shoulder responsibilities that should belong to adults, and it broke Joel's heart in ways he couldn't express. "Tell me about your day," Joel said, falling back on the conversational patterns that had sustained their family through good times and bad. Leo shrugged, a gesture that could mean anything or nothing. "Same as always. Mrs. Rodriguez thinks I should apply for more scholarships. She says there are programs specifically for kids from families like ours." "Families like ours? You know what I mean, Dad." Leo's voice carried a mixture of resignation and embarrassment. Poor families. The word hung in the air between them, like smoke from a fire that wouldn't quite go out. Joel had never thought of his family as poor, exactly, They'd always had enough food on the table, enough warmth in the winter, enough love to go around. But poverty, he was learning, wasn't just about what you had. It was about what you couldn't give your children, the dreams you couldn't afford to make real. We're not poor, Joel said finally. We're just between prosperities. It was something Maria used to say during the lean years, when Leo was small and Joel was still building his ferry business. She'd had a gift for reframing difficult situations, for finding hope in circumstances that might have crushed a lesser spirit. Joel tried to channel that gift now, for Leo's sake. After dinner, they settled into their evening routine. Leo disappeared, upstairs to work on homework and college applications, while Joel sat in his recliner with the day's mail and the weight of responsibilities that seemed to grow heavier each passing month. The bills were always there, patient as vultures, waiting to be acknowledged and somehow addressed. Tonight there was a letter from the hospital's billing department, another from the credit card company, and a friendly reminder from the county about property taxes that were coming due. Joel spread them across the coffee table like a poker hand he couldn't win, studying the numbers that represented more than money. They represented the distance between his family's current reality and the future he wanted to give his son. Outside, the Missouri River continued its ancient journey toward the Mississippi, carrying spring runoff and winter's accumulated debris toward destinations unknown. Joel had always found comfort in the river's constancy, its refusal to be stopped by obstacles in its path. Water found a way around rocks, carved new channels when the old ones became blocked, and always kept moving forward. He needed to be like the river, Joel thought. He needed to find a way forward, no matter what obstacles stood in his path. Tomorrow would bring another day of ferry crossings, another opportunity to earn the dollars that might somehow add up to his son's future. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all he had. The old house settled around him with familiar creaks and sighs. And somewhere upstairs, he could hear Leo's voice as the boy talked quietly on the phone, probably to his girlfriend Sarah, sharing the dreams and worries that belong to 18-year-olds everywhere. Those were good sounds, Joel reflected. They were the sounds of a family still fighting, still hoping, still believing that tomorrow might offer something better than today. He folded the bills carefully and placed them back in their envelopes. Tomorrow's problems could wait for tomorrow. Tonight, he had his son under his roof, his ferry tied safely to its moorings, and memories of Maria that felt like blessings instead of burdens. It wasn't everything he wanted, but it was enough to build on. Outside, the river flowed on through the darkness, carrying its cargo of spring dreams toward an uncertain but inevitable future. The spring flood came 3 days later, turning the Missouri River into a chocolate-brown torrent that swallowed fence posts and carried away anything foolish, enough to venture too close to its banks. Joel had seen floods before. They were part of the river's personality, as predictable as winter and twice as dangerous. But this one felt different somehow, charged with an energy that made his weathered hands grip the ferry's wheel a little tighter. He'd suspended ferry service that morning, not wanting to risk passengers' lives against the river's mood. Instead, he'd taken Maria's dream out alone, checking the moorings and making sure the channel markers were still visible above the surging water. It was during one of these safety runs that he spotted the Suitcase dot at first. Joel thought it might be a dead animal, something dark and bulky, riding the current about 50 yards upstream. But as it drew closer, he could see the distinctive shape of luggage, expensive-looking leather that gleamed even through the muddy water coating its surface. Without really thinking about it, Joel maneuvered the ferry into position and hauled the case aboard with a boat hook. His movements automatic after 30 years of pulling debris from the river dock. The suitcase was heavier than expected, and Joel could hear liquid sloshing inside as he secured it on the ferry's deck. Probably ruined, whatever was in there, but something about the quality of the leather and the brass hardware suggested it might be worth salvaging. Maybe the owner would pay a reward for its return, or maybe Joel could sell it to cover the cost of fuel he'd burned retrieving it. Back at the dock, Joel carried the suitcase to the small office he maintained in a converted shipping container. The space was cramped but functional, with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a coffee maker that had seen better decades. He set the suitcase on the desk and studied it more carefully. The leather was Italian. He guessed the kind of craftsmanship that cost more than most people made in a month. There were no visible identification tags, but the brass nameplate on the front had been engraved with the initials ED in elegant script. The locks were the old-fashioned kind that required a key, but the water had warped the mechanism enough that Joel could work them open with a screwdriver. Inside, wrapped in plastic bags that had kept most of the river water at bay, was a collection that took Joel's breath away. There were dozens of birthday cards, each one hand-drawn with colored pencils or crayons. The artwork showed the progression of someone learning to express themselves. Early cards were simple stick figures and crude lettering, while later ones demonstrated real artistic skill. All of them were addressed to "My Missing Boy" and signed, "With all my love, Mama." Beneath the cards, Joel found a portable DVD player and a collection of homemade discs, each one labeled with a year and the words "birthday message." The dates stretched back 30 years, from 1994 to 2024, an unbroken chain of annual recordings that spoke to a devotion Joel could barely comprehend. With hands that trembled slightly, Joel loaded the earliest disc into the player and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, revealing a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25. She had dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and eyes that held a mixture of hope and desperate sadness. She was sitting in what looked like a hotel room, generic furniture and beige walls, providing an impersonal backdrop for a deeply personal message. "Happy birthday, my sweet boy," she began, her voice soft and carefully controlled. "You're 3 years old today, wherever you are. I hope someone is throwing you a party with cake and balloons and all the things a little boy should have on his birthday. I hope you're happy and safe and loved." She paused, and Joel could see her struggling to maintain her composure. "I want you to know that I never stopped looking for you. Every day, I wonder what you're doing, what you look like now, whether you have my eyes or your father's smile. I dream about you at night, and I wake up every morning hoping this will be the day I find you." The young woman, who Joel now realized must be Evelyn Drake, based on the initials on the suitcase, reached for something off-camera and held up a small stuffed elephant. "I bought this for you at the toy store downtown. The lady there said, 'Little boys like elephants because they're strong and brave. I'm keeping it safe until I can give it to you myself.'" Joel found himself leaning forward, drawn into the raw emotion of the recording. This wasn't the cold, calculating businesswoman he'd read about in the papers. This was a mother, broken by loss and sustained only by hope. "I made some mistakes," Evelyn continued on the screen, her voice beginning to crack. "I was young and scared, and I let people convince me that I wasn't ready to be your mother, but I was wrong to listen to them. I should have fought harder, should have been braver. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for that mistake." The recording ended with Evelyn holding the stuffed elephant close to her chest, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "I love you, baby. I'll never stop loving you." Joel sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. He'd expected to find corporate documents, maybe some contracts or financial records that he could return for a modest reward. Instead, he'd stumbled into a private tragedy that spanned 3 decades, curiosity overcoming his usual respect for privacy. Joel loaded another disc, this one from 2010. The Evelyn on this recording was older, more polished, but the pain in her eyes was exactly the same. "Happy 16th birthday," she said, sitting in what appeared to be an upscale office, all mahogany and leather. I imagine you're learning to drive now, maybe going to homecoming dances or playing sports. I've hired new investigators, better ones this time. They have some promising leads, and I really think this might be the year we find each other." She held up a car key. "I bought you a car, nothing too flashy, just a reliable Honda that will keep you safe. It's sitting in my garage, waiting for you. I know you probably don't need it anymore, but I wanted you to know that I was thinking about what a 16-year-old boy might want from his mother." Joel fast-forwarded through several more recordings, watching Evelyn age in time-lapse, while her message remained heartbreakingly consistent. She spoke of college funds established in his name, of birthday parties thrown for no one, of Christmas mornings spent opening presents she'd bought for a son who wasn't there to receive them. The final recording was dated just 6 months ago. The Evelyn on this disc was the woman Joel recognized from business magazines, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that came from building an empire. But when she spoke about her son, she might as well have been that heartbroken 25-year-old again. 30 years, she said simply. 30 years of birthday messages to a boy who's now a man, who probably has children of his own. The investigators tell me the trail has gone cold, that too much time has passed, that I should accept the possibility that you might not want to be found. She paused, staring directly into the camera with an intensity that made Joel feel like she was speaking to him personally. But I can't accept that. I won't accept that. You're my son, and somewhere out there, you're living a life that I should have been part of. I know I have no right to your forgiveness, no claim on your love, but I need you to know that not a day has passed that I haven't thought about you." Evelyn reached for something off camera and held up a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter I wrote to you when you were born, explaining why I had to give you up. I was 17, unmarried, and my family convinced me that adoption was the only responsible choice. I was supposed to forget about you and move on with my life. Instead, I've spent every day since then trying to find my way back to you." She unfolded the letter, her hands shaking slightly. "I'm including this in the collection, along with all the other messages and gifts I've saved for you. If something happens to me, if I don't live to see you again, I want you to know that you were wanted, that you were loved. That giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done." The recording ended with Evelyn looking directly into the camera, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "If you're watching this, if somehow these messages found their way to you, please know that I never stopped being your mother. I never stopped hoping. And if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I'd like the chance to be part of your life, even if it's just for a little while." Joel turned off the DVD player and sat in the silence of his small office, overwhelmed by what he'd witnessed. Outside, the Missouri River continued its relentless journey toward the sea, carrying with it the debris of human lives and the hopes of people who trusted the current to take their dreams somewhere better. He thought about Leo, about the love that had shaped his son's life, and the security that came from knowing he was wanted, cherished, protected. Joel couldn't imagine the pain of being separated from his child, of spending 30 years wondering if that child was safe, happy, loved by the people who were raising him. The smart thing to do would be to contact Evelyn Drake immediately, to return the suitcase and its contents without delay. But Joel found himself hesitating, not from any desire to keep what wasn't his, but from a recognition that this collection represented something sacred, a mother's love preserved in its purest form, unsullied by the complications of actual relationship. As he carefully repacked the cards and DVDs, Joel noticed something else tucked into the suitcase's side pocket. It was a business card for a private investigation firm in Kansas City, with a handwritten note on the back. "Last lead went nowhere. Client wants to continue search indefinitely. Payment guaranteed regardless of outcome." Joel turned the card over in his hands, thinking about the resources that had been poured into this search, The years of professional investigators following cold trails and chasing shadows. All that money and expertise, and yet the suitcase had ended up floating in the Missouri River, its precious contents nearly lost to the current. Maybe that meant something. Maybe the river had carried this collection to him for a reason, the way it carried everything else, with purpose. Even when that purpose wasn't immediately clear, Joel reached for his phone, then stopped. Evelyn Drake was one of the most powerful people in the state, a woman who owned hotels and office buildings and probably had more money than Joel could comprehend. One phone call would bring her world crashing into his, and he wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of disruption. But as he looked at the birthday cards spread across his desk, each one a testament to a love that had endured 3 decades of separation, Joel knew he couldn't keep this discovery to himself. Somewhere out there was a son who had never received these messages, a man who had no idea that his birth mother had spent 30 years trying to find him. Joel picked up his phone and dialed information, asking for the number of Drake Hospitality's corporate headquarters. It was time to make a call that would change everything. The helicopter appeared over the river at exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, its rotors beating the air with a precision that spoke of corporate efficiency and unlimited resources. Joel watched from his ferry dock as the aircraft circled, once looking for a suitable landing spot before settling on the gravel parking area behind Miller's hardware store. Within minutes, half the town had gathered to watch the spectacle. Joel straightened his worn flannel shirt and ran a hand through his graying hair, suddenly conscious of how he must appear to someone accustomed to boardrooms and 5-star hotels. The phone conversation with Evelyn Drake's assistant had been brief and businesslike. Ms. Drake would retrieve her property personally, and she would arrive within 2 hours. No questions asked, no explanations offered. The woman who emerged from the helicopter was exactly what Joel had expected, and nothing like the vulnerable young mother he'd seen in those early recordings. Evelyn Drake moved with the controlled grace of someone who commanded attention in every room she entered. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the helicopter ride, and her charcoal business suit probably cost more than Joel made in a month. Even her shoes' designer heels that had no business on a gravel parking lot seemed to make a statement about the kind of woman who wore them. She was accompanied by a younger man in an expensive suit, probably a lawyer or an assistant, who stayed close to her side as they walked toward the dock. Joel could see the townspeople watching from their windows and doorways, probably wondering what kind of trouble their quiet ferry skipper had gotten himself into. "Mr. Ramirez?" Evelyn's voice was crisp and professional, with just a hint of the Kansas accent she'd probably spent years trying to eliminate. Up close, Joel could see the traces of the young woman from the videos. The same dark eyes, the same determined set to her jaw, but everything else had been polished and hardened by decades of success. "Yes, ma'am. I have your suitcase waiting. For you." Joel gestured toward his small office, trying to match her businesslike tone. "I hope everything inside is still in good condition. The river got to it before I could pull it out." Something flickered across Evelyn's face at the mention of the suitcase's contents, so quickly that Joel almost missed it. For just a moment, the composed businesswoman cracked, revealing the anxious mother underneath. "You opened it?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. Joel nodded, not seeing any point in lying. "I needed to check for identification so I could return it to its owner. I'm sorry if that was an invasion of privacy, but I thought you'd want it back." Evelyn exchanged a glance with her companion, who stepped forward with the kind of protective instinct that lawyers developed around their wealthy clients. "Ms. Drake appreciates your honesty, Mr. Ramirez, but the contents of that case are extremely private. We trust you understand the sensitive nature of—" "It's all right, Richard," Evelyn interrupted, her attention focused entirely on Joel. "Mr. Ramirez, what exactly did you see in the suitcase?" The question hung between them like a bridge that could be crossed or burned, depending on how Joel chose to answer. He could lie, claim he'd only seen paperwork and personal items. Let her take the suitcase and disappear back into her world of corporate power and private helicopters. It would be the safe choice, the one that wouldn't complicate his already difficult life. Instead, Joel found himself thinking about Leo, about the love that had shaped his son's life, and about a missing boy who had spent 30 years not knowing. His mother was looking for him. "I saw the birthday cards," he said quietly, "and I watched some of the videos." Evelyn's carefully maintained composure crumbled. She closed her eyes and took a shaky breath, and when she opened them again, Joel could see the same desperate hope that had haunted those early recordings. "All of them?" she whispered. "Enough to understand what they mean to you," Joel replied, "and what they might mean to your son if he ever gets the chance to see them." For a long moment, the only sound was the helicopter's cooling engine and the distant murmur of the river. Richard shifted uncomfortably, clearly out of his depth in a conversation that had moved far beyond legal territory. "Miss Drake," Richard said carefully, "we should collect the case and return to Kansas City. You have the board meeting at 5? Cancel it," Evelyn said without taking her eyes off Joel. "Cancel everything for the rest of the day." She studied Joel with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people's motivations, searching for the angle, the hidden agenda that everyone seemed to have when dealing with her wealth and power. But Joel just waited patiently, his weathered hands folded in front of him, radiating the kind of steady calm that came from a lifetime of honest work. "You could have demanded a reward," she said finally, "or tried to sell the contents to the tabloids. There are people who would pay handsomely for this kind of personal information about me." Joel shrugged. "Wouldn't be right. Those messages are between you and your boy. Nobody else's business. But you called me anyway." "Why?" "It was a fair question, and Joel considered it carefully before answering. "I have a son," he said finally. "He's 18, getting ready for college. I can't imagine what it would be like to be separated from him, not knowing if he was safe or happy, or," Joel's voice caught slightly, "a mother's love shouldn't go to waste in a river. It should find its way to where it belongs." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears that she blinked away quickly, a lifetime of corporate control reasserting itself. But Joel had seen the crack in her armor, the vulnerable woman who existed beneath the business suit and the net worth. "The trail went cold years ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The investigators say he could be anywhere, that he might not even want to be found. They think I should accept that some questions don't have answers. Maybe," Joel said, "but maybe the river brought that suitcase to the right person at the right time. I've lived on this water my whole life, and I know it doesn't give up its secrets without a reason." He gestured toward the Missouri River, brown and swollen with spring runoff. "This river connects to a lot of places, touches a lot of lives. If your son grew up anywhere in this part of the country, there's a good chance he's connected to these waters somehow. And I know these river communities better than any city investigator ever could." Evelyn stared at him for a long moment, processing what he was suggesting. "You're offering to help me look for him?" "I'm offering what I have," Joel said simply. "My boat, my knowledge of the river towns, my time. It's not much compared to what you're used to, but sometimes the simplest approach is the one that works." Richard stepped forward again, his lawyer instincts clearly alarmed. "Ms. Drake, I really don't think this is advisable. We don't know anything about Mr. Ramirez, and getting personally involved in the search could create legal complications." "Richard," Evelyn's voice carried the steel that had built a business empire, "go back to the helicopter. Wait for me there." The lawyer hesitated, clearly wanting to argue, but something in Evelyn's expression told him that resistance would be futile. He walked away reluctantly, leaving Joel and Evelyn alone on the dock. "Why would you do this?" Evelyn asked. "What's in it for you?" It was the question of a woman who had learned that everyone wanted something, that generosity always came with a price tag. Joel understood the suspicion. He'd probably feel the same way if their positions were reversed. Nothing, he said honestly, except maybe the chance to help a mother find her son. And maybe, he hesitated, thinking about Leo and the financial pressures that kept him awake at night. Maybe the knowledge that I did something good in the world, something that mattered. Evelyn studied his face, searching for deception and finding only sincerity. It was a commodity she'd encountered so rarely in her business dealings that she'd almost forgotten what it looked like. I pay my investigators very well, she said carefully. If you were to help me, it would only be fair to compensate you for your time and expenses. Joel shook his head. This isn't about money. This is about doing what's right. But even as he said it, Joel couldn't help thinking about Leo's college acceptance letter, about the mounting bills and the dreams that seemed to slip further away each day. He wasn't looking for charity, wasn't the type of man who could accept handouts even when he desperately needed them. But if he could earn money by helping Evelyn find her son, if he could solve two problems at once, I'll need to think about it, Joel said finally. This isn't a decision I can make lightly. I have responsibilities here, people who depend on me. Evelyn nodded, recognizing the careful pride of a man who had never asked for help and didn't intend to start now. I understand. But Mr. Ramirez, Joel, I want you to know that what you've done today, returning those recordings to me, it means more than you could possibly know. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to him. That's my private number. If you decide you want to help, call me directly, anytime, day or night. Joel took the card, noting the elegant script of her handwriting and the weight of the paper. Everything about Evelyn Drake spoke of quality, of resources that seemed unlimited. It was a world so different from his own that they might as well have been speaking different languages. The suitcase, Evelyn said, glancing toward his office. I should take it with me. Joel nodded and led her to the small building, where the leather case sat on his desk like a treasure chest full of memories. Evelyn approached it slowly, reverently, her fingers tracing the brass nameplate as if it were a religious artifact. I've carried this with me for 15 years, she said softly, everywhere I go, every business trip, every meeting. I tell people it's my important documents, but really it's just hope, Joel finished. It's hope that you carry with you. Evelyn looked up at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected a ferry skipper to understand something so abstract. But Joel understood hope better than most people. He'd carried it through Maria's illness, through the financial struggles that followed, through every day of watching his son grow up with dreams that might never be realized. Yes, Evelyn said simply, it's hope. She closed the suitcase carefully, handling it with the tenderness reserved for precious things. As she prepared to leave, Joel found himself thinking about the videos he'd watched, about the young woman who had recorded message after message for a son who couldn't hear them. Ms. Drake, he said as she reached the door, for what it's worth, I think your boy would be proud to know his mother never gave up looking for him. That kind of love, it's rare in this world. Evelyn turned back to him, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. She wasn't a billionaire businesswoman or a corporate executive. She was just a mother who had lost her child and spent 30 years trying to find him again. Thank you, she whispered, and then she was gone, walking back toward the helicopter with the suitcase in her hand and 30 years of maternal devotion. Tucked safely under her arm, Joel watched the helicopter lift off and disappear toward the horizon, carrying Evelyn Drake back to her world of board meetings and quarterly reports. But the business card remained in his pocket, solid and real, along with the memory of a woman who had trusted him with her most precious secret. That evening, as he sat at his kitchen table with Leo, Joel found himself studying his son's face with new appreciation. The boy was complaining about his calculus homework, the same way 18-year-olds had probably complained since calculus was invented. But Joel could only think about how lucky he was to hear those complaints, to be part his son's daily life. Dad? Leo was looking at him with concern. You okay? You seem different today. Joel smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his son's shoulder. Just thinking about how fortunate we are, son. Sometimes it takes meeting someone less fortunate to remind you of your blessings. Later that night, after Leo had gone to bed, Joel sat on the front porch in Maria's old rocking chair, turning Evelyn Drake's business card over in his hands. The river flowed past in the darkness, carrying its cargo of secrets and dreams toward destinations unknown. Somewhere out there was a man who had no idea his birth mother was looking for him, who had grown up without ever receiving those birthday messages or knowing about the stuffed elephant that waited in a garage somewhere. Joel thought about his ferry, about the bridge he provided between one shore and another, and wondered if perhaps he was meant to be a different kind of bridge, now one that connected a mother to her lost son. That spanned 30 years of separation with nothing more than determination and hope. The decision, when it came, felt as inevitable as the river's flow toward the sea. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into their search, from the most unlikely source imaginable. Joel was in his office, working through a list of Milwaukee insurance companies where Stanley Kowalski might have been employed when his phone rang. Is this Joel Ramirez? The voice was elderly, female, with the careful pronunciation of someone who had learned English as a second language. Yes, ma'am. How can I help you? My name is Anna Kowalski. I saw your notice on the adoption reunion website. You are looking for my grandson. Joel's coffee mug slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering on the concrete floor of his office. He'd posted information about their search on dozens of websites, but he'd never really expected anyone to respond. In his experience, the river gave up its secrets slowly, reluctantly, requiring patience and persistence rather than sudden revelations. Ma'am, could you repeat that? David, Anna said, her voice trembling with emotion. My grandson, David. Stanley and Ellen adopted him in 1991 from Sacred Heart in Missouri. I have been looking for him too, ever since. Her voice broke. Ever since my son and daughter-in-law died in a car accident 5 years ago. Joel sank into his chair, his mind racing. Mrs. Kowalski, where are you calling from? Kansas City. I moved back here after Stanley and Ellen passed. David was 18 then, about to start college. He was so angry about losing his parents, so lost. We had words, terrible words, and he left. I haven't seen him since. Joel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of multiple tragedies converging on one young man's life. To lose his adoptive parents. At 18, to argue with his grandmother and disappear, it painted a picture of someone who had been running from pain for 15 years. Mrs. Kowalski, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll understand why. Do you have any proof that David is the boy we're looking for? Any documentation from the adoption? There was a pause, and the sound of papers rustling. I have his adoption certificate. It shows he was born March 15th, 1991, in Missouri. His birth mother's name was listed as E. Drake. Joel's heart hammered against his ribs. Mrs. Kowalski, I'm going to need to call you back. Can you give me your number? And please, don't contact anyone else about this until we have a chance to talk more. After getting Anna's contact information, Joel immediately called Evelyn. She answered on the first ring, the way she always did now, as if she were waiting for the call that might change everything. We found him, Joel said without preamble. Or rather, his grandmother found us. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Joel wondered if the connection had been lost. When Evelyn finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Are you certain? Birth date matches. Birth mother listed as E. Drake. adopted by Stanley and Ellen Kowalski from Sacred Heart Family Services in 1991. His name is David. David. Evelyn repeated the name like a prayer. My son's name is David. Joel could hear her crying, not the controlled tears of someone trying to maintain composure, but the raw, unguarded sobs of a mother who had just learned her child was real, was alive, had a name and a history and a place in the world. There's more, Joel said gently, when her tears had subsided enough for her to listen. His adoptive parents died 5 years ago. He had a falling out with his grandmother and disappeared. She's been looking for him ever since. So he's lost too, Evelyn said, and Joel could hear her struggling to process this new information. He's been alone for 5 years. We don't know that. He might have built a new life somewhere, might have friends, a job, maybe even a family of his own. But his grandmother, Anna Kowalski, she has more information about him. Recent photos, maybe some idea of where he might have gone. Within 2 hours, Evelyn had flown to Kansas City, and by that afternoon, Joel found himself sitting in Anna Kowalski's small apartment, looking at photographs of the young man Evelyn had been searching for all these years. David Kowalski was 33 years old, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that reminded Joel powerfully of the young woman in those early birthday videos. He had Evelyn's determined jaw and her expressive hands, but there was something else in his expression, a guardedness that spoke of loss and disappointment. He was such a good boy, Anna said, her arthritic fingers tracing the edge of a graduation photo. Smart kind, always helping others. Stanley and Ellen raised him well. But when they died, she shook her head sadly. He blamed himself somehow, said if he'd been a better son, maybe God wouldn't have taken them away. Evelyn studied each photograph with the intensity of someone memorizing sacred texts. Joel watched her face change as she absorbed 33 years of her son's life in the space of an hour for steps, school pictures, birthday parties, graduation ceremonies, all the moments she'd missed compressed into a stack of snapshots. He looks happy, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. In the early pictures, before his parents died, he looks genuinely happy. Oh, he was, Anna assured her. Stanley and Ellen adored him. They never hid the fact that he was adopted, always spoke of it as a blessing. They used to tell him that somewhere out there was a woman who loved him enough to make sure he had the best possible life. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. They said that? Every year on his birthday, Anna nodded. Ellen would say, your birth mother is thinking about you today. David, wherever she is, she's thinking about you and hoping you're happy. Joel felt his own eyes growing damp as he imagined those birthday conversations. The way David's adoptive parents had honored Evelyn's sacrifice while building their own relationship with their son. It was exactly the kind of love that Evelyn had hoped for when she'd made the hardest decision of her life. Do you have any idea where he might be now? Joel asked. Any friends he might have contacted? Places he mentioned wanting to go? Anna disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a cardboard box filled with David's belongings, things he'd left behind when he'd stormed out of her apartment 5 years ago. There were college textbooks, a few items of clothing, and a journal that Anna had never had the heart to read. He studied engineering at the University of Missouri, she explained. He was always good with his hands, liked to build things, fix things. Stanley used to joke that David could take apart a radio and put it back together better than new. Evelyn looked up sharply. The University of Missouri? In Columbia? Yes, why? Joel felt a chill of recognition. That's where Leo is planning to go. My son. He's been accepted to their engineering program. The coincidence felt too significant to ignore, as if the river that had brought Evelyn's suitcase to Joel's ferry was still working to bring the right people together at the right time. David never finished his degree, Anna continued. After Stanley and Ellen died, he dropped out, said college felt pointless without them there to see him graduate. But he was so close, only had one semester left. Joel made a note to check with the university's alumni office to see if they had any records of David's current whereabouts. It was a long shot, but engineering was a specialized field, and there might be professional organizations or licensing boards that tracked graduates. As they prepared to leave Anna's apartment, the elderly woman pressed something into Evelyn's hands, a small silver locket that had belonged to Ellen Kowalski. She wore this every day, Anna explained. Inside is a picture of David when he was 5 years old, and a little card that says, "To David's birth mother, with love and gratitude." Evelyn opened the locket with trembling fingers, revealing a tiny photograph of a gap-toothed boy with his arms wrapped around a golden retriever. The card was written in careful script. "Thank you for the greatest gift we could ever receive. We promise to love him as our own, and to never let him forget that he was wanted by 2 mothers. It was too much." Evelyn broke down completely. 33 years of carefully controlled emotion, pouring out in a flood of tears and incoherent words of gratitude. Joel held her awkwardly, unsure of how to comfort someone whose grief was so much larger than anything he'd experienced. But Anna understood. She wrapped her arms around Evelyn with the natural grace of someone who had spent her life caring for others, murmuring words of comfort in a mixture of English and Polish that needed no translation. "We'll find him," Anna said fiercely. "All of us together will find our boy and bring him home." The drive back to Riverside was silent, both Joel and Evelyn overwhelmed by the day's revelations. They had a name now, a face, a history, but they also had new questions, new worries about a young man who had been carrying his own burden of loss and guilt. "He's been hurt," Evelyn said finally, as Joel's truck crossed the Missouri River on the old steel bridge. First by losing his birth family, then by losing his adoptive parents. How do you approach someone who's been hurt that many times? Joel thought about his own experience with grief, about the dark months after Maria's death, when well-meaning friends and neighbors had tried to offer comfort that felt more like intrusion. "Carefully," he said, with respect for his pain and his choices. "He might not want to be found, Evelyn. He might not be ready for another family relationship, another chance to lose someone he cares about." "I know," she whispered. "But I have. To try. I've waited 33 years to tell him I'm sorry, to tell him I love him, to explain why I let him go. Even if he doesn't want a relationship with me, he deserves to know the truth." Joel nodded, understanding the parental imperative that drove her forward despite the risks. If Leo were lost somewhere, carrying pain and anger that Joel couldn't heal, he would move heaven and earth to find him, to offer whatever comfort or explanation might help. "We'll find him," Joel said, echoing Anna's promise. "And when we do, we'll let him decide what happens next." That night, Joel lay awake thinking about the photograph of 5-year-old David with his arms around a dog, about the young man who had dropped out of college rather than graduate without his parents there to celebrate. Somewhere in Missouri, or beyond, a 33-year-old man was living his life, probably unaware that 2 women and a ferry skipper were working to bridge the gap between his past and his future. The search had a face now, a name, a destination. Tomorrow, they would begin the final phase of their journey, not just finding David Kowalski, but figuring out how to approach a man who had every reason to be suspicious of people who claimed to care about him. Joel touched Maria's ring where it rested against his chest, drawing strength from her memory. She would have known what to do, how to balance hope with caution, how to honor someone's pain while offering the possibility of healing. The river flowed past in the darkness, carrying their hopes toward an uncertain but increasingly possible future. The photograph arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by overnight mail from a woman in St. Louis whose granddaughter had seen their missing person posting on social media. Joel's hands trembled as he opened the envelope, revealing a candid shot taken at a construction site somewhere in Missouri. The man in the photo was older than the graduation pictures Anna Kowalski had shown them, his face weathered by 5 years of outdoor work and emotional hardship, but there was no mistaking those dark eyes or the determined set of his jaw. David Kowalski was working construction in central Missouri, less than 100 miles from where his birth mother had spent 33 years searching for him. Mrs. Chun says her granddaughter works for the same company. Joel explained to Evelyn over the phone. Morrison Construction. They're based in Columbia, but they work all over the state. David goes by Dave now, and he's been with them for about 3 years. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Joel wondered if Evelyn had fainted. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but fragile, like glass that might shatter if handled too roughly. 3 years. He's been that close to me for 3 years. Joel understood her amazement. Columbia was where Evelyn had attended business school decades ago, where she still maintained an office for her hotel development projects. She'd probably driven past construction sites where her son was working, never knowing how close she'd come to the reunion she'd dreamed of for so long. Mrs. Chun gave me the foreman's number, Joel continued. His name is Mike Torres, and he says Dave is one of his best workers. Reliable, skilled, keeps to himself mostly, but gets along fine with the crew. What do we do now? Evelyn asked. We can't just show up at his job site. That would embarrass him in front of his coworkers, might make him run again. Joel had been thinking about the same problem. After 5 years of independence, David had built a new life on his own terms. Any approach would need to respect his autonomy while offering him the choice of whether to engage with his past. I think we need to go slow, Joel said. Maybe I could talk to his foreman first, explain the situation in general terms. See if Dave has mentioned anything about his family, his background. We need to understand where his head is before we make contact. That afternoon, Joel drove to Columbia and found Mike Torres at a job site where Morrison Construction was building a new shopping center. The foreman was a compact man in his 50s with calloused hands and the patient demeanor of someone who had spent his career managing both buildings and people. Dave Kowalski? Mike squinted against the afternoon sun, his hard hat tilted back on his graying head. Yeah, he's good people. Works harder than men half his age. Never complains. Always willing to help the younger guys learn the trade. Joel explained that he was trying to help reunite David with family members who had been searching for him, keeping the details vague to protect everyone's privacy. Mike listened with the careful attention of a man who understood that construction crews often became surrogate families for workers who had nowhere else to go. Dave don't talk much about his past, Mike said thoughtfully. I know he lost his folks in an accident. Know he's got some college education he never finished, but he's never mentioned having other family looking for him. Would you say he's settled here? Happy with his work? Mike considered the question carefully. Happy might be too strong a word. Dave's carrying something heavy, like he's working real hard to stay busy enough that he don't have time to think about whatever's eating at him. But he's good at what he does, and the crew respects him. That counts for something. Joel nodded, recognizing the description of a man who was surviving rather than thriving, who had found purpose in physical labor and the satisfaction of building things that would last. If someone wanted to approach him hypothetically, how would you suggest they go about it? Mike scratched his chin, leaving a streak of dirt on his weathered face. Dave's got a little apartment over on Elm Street, walks to work most days. He eats lunch at Murphy's Diner every Friday, always sits at the counter, always orders the same thing, meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Real creature of habit, our Dave. He sounds lonely. Maybe, or maybe he just likes his own company. Some folks get burned enough times, they stop reaching out, Don't mean they don't want connection, just means they're scared to try again. Joel spent the rest of the afternoon observing from a distance as David worked with his crew, noting the easy way he interacted with the other men while maintaining a certain separateness. He was clearly competent at his job, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who had found his rhythm. But there was something solitary about him, even in the middle of a busy construction site. That evening, Joel met Evelyn at a hotel in Colombia, where she'd checked in under an assumed name to avoid attracting attention. The anonymity was important. She couldn't risk David discovering her identity through news, reports, or social media before they had a chance to approach him properly. "I saw him," Joel said without preamble as he settled into the hotel room's single chair, from across the street, but I saw him working. Evelyn's face went white. "How did he look?" "I mean, did he seem?" "He looked like a man who's been taking care of himself, but not taking care of his heart," Joel said gently. "Physically strong, competent at his work, but carrying something heavy on the inside." Joel described his conversation with Mike Torres, the foreman's insights about David's character and habits. As he talked, Evelyn sat perfectly still, absorbing every detail about the son she'd been imagining for 33 years. "He eats lunch alone," she said finally. "That breaks my heart somehow. All those birthday messages I recorded, all those years of hoping he was surrounded by people who loved him, and he's eating lunch alone." "Alone doesn't necessarily mean lonely," Joel pointed out, "and it doesn't mean he's unhappy. Some people process grief by pulling inward for a while, but privately, Joel was concerned about the picture Mike Torres had painted. 5 years was a long time to be running from emotional pain, a long time to keep the world at arm's length. David Kowalski sounded like a man who had convinced himself that isolation was safer than connection, that losing people hurt less if you never let them get close in the first place. "I want to see him," Evelyn said suddenly. "I know we agreed to approach this carefully, but I need to see my son with my own eyes." Joel understood the impulse, but he also recognized the danger. "Evelyn, if he spots you watching him, if he feels like he's being stalked by strangers, I'll be careful. I'll stay across the street, wear sunglasses, blend into the crowd. I just need to see him moving through the world, need to know he's real." The next morning, they positioned themselves at a coffee shop across from the construction site, arriving early enough to secure a table by the window. Joel felt like a private investigator in a bad movie, but he understood Evelyn's need to bridge the gap between imagination and reality, to replace 33 years of wondering with actual observation. David arrived at 7:30, walking with the steady pace of someone who had made the same journey hundreds of times. He was taller than Joel had expected, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean strength that came from physical labor. His work clothes were clean but well worn, and he carried his lunch in a metal box that looked like it had belonged to his adoptive father. "That's him," Evelyn whispered, her voice filled with wonder and heartbreak. "That's my son." Joel watched her face as she studied David's movements, cataloging every gesture and expression like a naturalist observing a rare species. When David stopped to help a younger worker with a heavy beam, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "He's kind," she said, just like Ellen Kowalski said he would be. "He's kind and strong, and," her voice broke, "he looks so much like my father. I never noticed it in the photographs, but seeing him move, seeing his posture, he has my father's way of carrying himself." They watched David work for 2 hours, noting his interactions with the crew, his careful attention to safety protocols, the way he seemed to take genuine satisfaction in seeing a structure take shape under his hands. It was clear he'd found something in construction work that appealed to him, the tangible results, the straightforward problems with clear solutions, the camaraderie of men working toward a common goal. "He's built a life," Joel observed. "Maybe not the life he planned, maybe not the life his adoptive parents hoped for him, but a decent life nonetheless." "But he's alone in it," Evelyn said. And I know something about that. I know what it's like to build walls so high that nobody can hurt you, but nobody can reach you either. As they prepared to leave, Evelyn made a decision that surprised Joel with its restraint. "I want to write him a letter," she said. "Not revealing who I am, not asking for anything. Just a letter from someone who appreciates the man he's become." "What would you say?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "I'd tell him that someone noticed his kindness to the younger workers, his attention to detail, his strength. I'd tell him that those are qualities his adoptive parents would be proud of, that they're not gone just because he can't see them anymore." It was a wise approach, Joel thought. A way of reaching out without overwhelming, of offering comfort, without demanding reciprocation. They would leave the letter with Mike Torres, who could deliver it as a message from an admirer rather than a family member. That evening, they sat in Evelyn's hotel room as she composed the letter by hand, choosing each word carefully. Joel watched her write with the same intensity she'd once brought to recording birthday messages, pouring maternal love into sentences that couldn't reveal their true source. "Dear David," she wrote, "I was having coffee across from your construction site this morning and couldn't help but notice the way you work. There's something beautiful about watching someone who takes pride in their craft, who treats their coworkers with respect and kindness. Your adoptive parents raised you well, and I'm sure they would be proud of the man you've become. Sometimes grief makes us feel like we're honoring the dead by carrying their pain, but I think they'd want you to carry their love instead. You have gifts to share with the world, and there are people who would be grateful to know you. I hope you find your way to them, and that they find their way to you. With admiration, a friend." It wasn't everything Evelyn wanted to say. It couldn't be, but it was a beginning, a way of planting seeds that might someday grow into something larger. A bridge built one careful plank at a time. Joel delivered the letter to Mike Torres the next morning, along with instructions to give it to David during a quiet moment when the gesture wouldn't attract attention from the rest of the crew. Then they returned to Riverside to wait, to hope, and to prepare for whatever response their careful overture might provoke. The river had carried them this far, bringing together the right people at the right time through a combination of chance and determination. Now they could only trust that the current would continue to carry them toward the reunion that had been 33 years in the making. The call came at 6 a.m, jolting Joel from sleep with the insistence of an emergency. He fumbled for his phone, expecting bad news about the ferry or some crisis with Leo's college plans. Instead, he found Mike Torres on the other end of the line, his voice tight with an emotion Joel couldn't immediately identify. "Mr. Ramirez, you need to get down here. Dave read that letter you left, and he's asking questions. A lot of questions." Joel was fully awake now, adrenaline flooding his system. What kind of questions? About who wrote it, how they knew about his adoptive parents, why someone would be watching him work. He's smart, our Dave, too smart to believe. This was just some random admirer passing by. Joel closed his eyes, feeling the careful foundation they'd built beginning to shift. They'd known this moment would come eventually. David was an intelligent man, and the letter had contained enough specific details to raise suspicions. But they'd hoped for more time to prepare, more opportunity to establish trust before revealing the full truth. Is he angry? Not angry exactly, more like scared. Like he's been waiting for the other shoe to drop, and now maybe it has. Joel understood that fear intimately. It was the wariness of someone who had lost too much, who had learned to view unexpected kindness as a potential threat rather than a gift. "Can you keep him there? Just for an hour or two. I need to make some calls, need to figure out how to handle this." "I'll try, but Dave's his own man. If he decides to walk away from this job, from this whole situation, there's not much I can do to stop him." After ending the call, Joel immediately contacted Evelyn, who answered with the alertness of someone who had been waiting for news, good or bad, for 33 years. "He knows," Joel said without preamble. "David knows the letter wasn't from a casual observer. Mike Torres says he's asking questions about who's been watching him." The silence stretched long enough that Joel began to worry the connection had been lost. When Evelyn finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who understood that their careful approach had reached its limits. "We have to tell him the truth," she said. "All of it. About the suitcase, about the search, about who I am. He deserves to know why strangers have been investigating his life." Joel felt his stomach clench with anxiety. The revelation they'd been building toward for weeks was suddenly upon them, and he wasn't sure any of them were ready for the emotional earthquake it would trigger. "Evelyn, if we do this, if we tell him everything, there's no going back. He might not react the way you're hoping. He might be angry or frightened, or he might just walk away and disappear again." "I know," she said quietly, "but keeping secrets from him isn't fair, and it isn't working anyway. If I'm going to lose my son again, I'd rather it be because I told him the truth than because I tried to manipulate him with half-truths and anonymous letters." By 10 o'clock that morning, Joel and Evelyn were driving toward Columbia in his pickup truck, the leather suitcase secured in the back like evidence in a trial that was about to begin. The morning mist clung to the Missouri River as they crossed the old steel bridge, and Joel found himself thinking about all the times he'd made this journey over the past month, each trip carrying them closer to this moment of reckoning. "What if he doesn't want to see me?" Evelyn asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her since David's birth. "What if learning about the search, about the birthday messages, makes him angry instead of grateful?" Joel considered the question carefully. "Then we respect his feelings and his choice. But Evelyn, you've carried this guilt for 33 years, believing you abandoned him when you were really trying to give him the best possible life. Maybe it's time to let him decide what your sacrifice meant to him." They found David at Murphy's Diner, exactly where Mike Torres had said he would be. It was his regular Friday lunch spot, and through the large front window, they could see him sitting at the counter, mechanically eating meatloaf and mashed potatoes while staring at a folded piece of paper, the letter Evelyn had written. "He looks troubled," Evelyn observed, her maternal instincts activated by the sight of her son's obvious distress. Joel studied David's posture, the way he held his shoulders, the methodical way he ate without seeming to taste his food. It was the body language of a man trying to solve a puzzle that didn't have enough pieces, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. "Are you ready for this?" Joel asked, his hand on the door handle. Evelyn touched the suitcase sitting between them, drawing strength from the 30 years of love it contained. "I've been ready for 33 years. They entered the diner quietly, Joel leading the way toward the counter where David sat alone. The lunch crowd was light. A few farmers, some office workers from downtown, the usual collection of people who appreciated honest food served without pretension. The normalcy of this setting felt surreal given the magnitude of what was about. "Tuho happen. David Kowalski?" Joel's voice was gentle but clear, designed to get attention without causing alarm. David turned on his stool, his dark eyes immediately alert and cautious. Up close, the resemblance to Evelyn was even more pronounced. The same intelligent gaze, the same stubborn set to his jaw, the same way of tilting his head slightly when assessing a situation. "Yeah, that's me. You the one who's been asking questions." "About me?" Joel nodded, acutely aware that every word from this moment forward would shape the trajectory of 3 lives. "My name is Joel Ramirez. This is Evelyn Drake. We'd like to talk to you, if you're willing to listen." David's expression didn't change, but Joel could see him processing the information, cataloging details with the methodical approach of someone who had learned to be careful about trusting strangers. "Drake," David repeated the name slowly. "That name was on my original birth certificate, before the adoption." "Yes," Evelyn said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was steady, despite the tears that were already forming in her eyes. David, I'm your birth mother. The words hung in the air between them, like smoke from a fire that had been burning for 33 years. David's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disbelief, anger, and something that might have been relief before settling into a carefully neutral mask. You're the woman who gave me away. It wasn't a question, and the flatness in David's voice cut through Evelyn like a blade. But she didn't flinch, didn't try to soften the harsh edges of his pain. Yes, she said simply. I'm the woman who gave you away, and I'm the woman who has spent every day since then trying to find you again. David stared at her for a long moment, studying her face with the intensity of someone comparing reality to childhood fantasies. Joel could see him noting the resemblances, the shared features that genetics had passed down across the years. Why now? David asked finally. Why after all this time? Joel stepped forward, pulling out his phone to show David the photos he'd taken of the suitcase and its contents. Because this washed up in the Missouri River 3 weeks ago, and I pulled it out thinking it might be worth something. Instead, I found 30 years of birthday messages that your mother recorded for you. David's eyes widened as he scrolled through the images, the hand-drawn cards, the DVDs labeled with years, the collection of gifts that had been waiting for him since birth. His hands trembled slightly as he absorbed the evidence of a love he'd never known existed. You made birthday messages? For me? Every year, Evelyn said, her voice breaking. Every single year. I recorded them hoping that somehow, someday, you'd get to see them, that you'd know you were never forgotten, never unwanted. David's carefully maintained composure began to crack. I thought my whole life, I thought you just didn't want me, that I was a mistake you were trying to forget. Never, Evelyn said fiercely. You were never a mistake. You were the most precious thing in my world, and giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I was 17 years old, unmarried, with no money and no support. The social workers convinced me that adoption was the loving choice, that giving you to people who could provide for you was better than keeping you in poverty. Joel watched David struggle with this new information, seeing the young man's worldview shifting as he tried to reconcile 33 years of assumption with the reality of his mother's love. The Kowalskis, David said suddenly. Stanley and Ellen, they were good people. They loved me. I know, Evelyn said, tears streaming down her face now. I met Anna, your grandmother. She told me what wonderful parents they were, how they raised you with love and never let you forget that you had another mother who cared about you. You met Anna? David's voice was sharp with surprise. How is she? I haven't seen her since. We fought after the funeral. She's fine, Joel interjected. She's been looking for you too, ever since you left Kansas City. She loves you, David. She's just been afraid to reach out because she thinks you're angry with her. David closed his eyes, and Joel could see him wrestling with 5 years of guilt and regret. I said terrible things to her. Blamed her for not preventing the accident, for not somehow keeping my parents safe. I was so angry, so lost, and she was the only one there to take it out on. Grief makes us say things we don't mean, Evelyn said gently. It makes us hurt the people who love us because they're the only ones close enough to hurt. Anna understands that. She just wants you to know you still have family, people who care about what happens to you. The diner had grown, quiet around them, other customers instinctively giving them space for a conversation that clearly carried enormous weight. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, refilled David's coffee cup without being asked and moved away with the practiced discretion of someone who had seen all kinds of human drama play out at her tables. The letter, David said, pulling out the folded paper he'd been reading when they arrived. You wrote this? Evelyn nodded. I wanted to reach out to you, to let you know that someone saw your kindness and strength. But I was afraid that learning about me too suddenly might scare you away. It might have, David admitted. 5 years ago, it definitely would have. But he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I've been thinking lately about how isolated I've become. How I've been using work and routine to avoid dealing with my feelings about losing Mom and Dad. Stanley and Ellen, Evelyn said. They were your parents in every way that mattered. I don't want to take anything away from that relationship or compete with their memory. David looked at her with surprise, as if he'd expected jealousy or possessiveness, rather than understanding. You don't mind that I call them Mom and Dad? I'm grateful to them, Evelyn said simply. They gave you the love and stability I couldn't provide. They raised you to be the kind man I saw helping his coworkers yesterday morning. How could I mind? For the first time since they'd approached him, David's expression softened. A defensive wariness remained, but underneath it Joel could see curiosity beginning to emerge, along with something that might have been hope. The birthday messages, David said. Are they? Could I see them? Evelyn's face lit up with joy so pure that Joel felt his own eyes growing damp. They're in the car, all of them. 33 years of a mother telling her son that she loves him. I'd like that, David said quietly. I'd like to know what you wanted to tell me all those years. As they prepared to leave the diner, Joel felt a profound sense of completion, as if the river that had carried the suitcase to his ferry had finally delivered its cargo to the right destination. But he also understood that this was just the beginning, a first tentative step toward healing wounds that had been 33 years in the making. The truth had been revealed, the secret had been shared, and now David Kowalski would have to decide what to do with the knowledge that he had been loved and wanted and searched for every day of his life. The choice was his to make, and whatever he decided, Joel knew that both he and Evelyn would respect it. But as they walked toward the parking lot, David walking between his birth mother and the ferry skipper who had brought them together, Joel allowed himself to hope that the river's current was still carrying them all toward something beautiful. They sat in Joel's truck in the diner parking lot, the leather suitcase open between them like a treasure chest that had finally found its rightful owner. David held the portable DVD player in his hands, staring at the collection of discs that represented 33 years of his mother's love, as if he couldn't quite believe they were real. I don't know if I'm ready to watch these, he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that some experiences change you forever. Once I see them, once I hear what you wanted to tell me all those years, I can't go back to not knowing. Evelyn reached across the suitcase and gently touched his hand. You don't have to watch them today, or tomorrow, or ever if you don't want to. They're yours now. You get to decide when and how you want to receive those messages. Joel watched the interaction between mother and son, noting the careful way they navigated around each other's emotional boundaries. 33 years of separation couldn't be healed in an afternoon, but there was something beautiful about watching them begin the process of learning each other's rhythms. The first one, David said, picking up the disc labeled 1994, age 3. What did you say in the first one? Evelyn's eyes filled with tears as she remembered that young woman sitting in a hotel room, broken by loss, but sustained by hope. I told you I was sorry. I told you I loved you. I told you about a stuffed elephant I bought for you that I was keeping safe until I could give it to you myself. Do you still have it? The elephant? It's in my bedroom closet, Evelyn said, with a watery smile, along with 32 years of birthday presents and Christmas gifts. I never stopped shopping for you, never stopped imagining what you might like at each age. David's composure finally cracked completely. He covered his face with his hands and wept deep, shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere he'd kept locked away for years. Evelyn moved closer to him in the truck's cab, her maternal instincts overriding any uncertainty about whether her comfort would be welcome. I'm sorry, David gasped between sobs. I'm sorry I'm such a mess. It's just, I spent my whole life wondering if my birth parents ever thought about me, ever regretted giving me away. And now to find out that you never stopped thinking about me, that you kept shopping for me and recording messages. You have nothing to apologize for, Evelyn said firmly. Crying is what hearts do when they're trying to heal. Joel found himself thinking about his own moments of overwhelming emotion. The day Maria died, the day Leo was accepted to college, the morning he'd first seen those birthday videos in his office. There was something sacred about witnessing someone else's emotional breakthrough, about being trusted with the raw vulnerability of a heart that was learning to hope again. As David's tears subsided, he began asking questions, not the angry demands of someone seeking justification, but the genuine curiosity of a man trying to understand his own story. He wanted to know about Evelyn's pregnancy, about the decision to place him for adoption, about what her life had been like in the years that followed. Evelyn answered each question honestly, holding nothing back. She told him about the shame and isolation she'd felt as an unmarried pregnant teenager, about the family and social pressures that had convinced her adoption was the only responsible choice. She spoke about the grief that had followed, the way his absence had shaped every decision she'd made since. I threw myself into work, she explained, built a business empire because achieving success felt like the only way to prove I was worthy of being your mother. Every hotel I opened, every deal I closed, I told myself it was for you, that someday when we were reunited, you'd be proud of what I'd accomplished. You built Drake Hospitality because of me? David asked, and Joel could hear the amazement in his voice. I built it because losing you broke something inside me that could only be fixed by finding you again. Success was just the currency I thought I needed to buy my way back into your life. Joey listened to this conversation with growing understanding of both Evelyn's drive and her isolation. She'd spent 33 years preparing for a reunion that might never come, building a fortress of achievement around a heart that remained focused on one simple goal, finding her son. Anna mentioned that you never married, David said carefully. Never had other children. Evelyn shook her head. How could I? Every relationship I started, I found myself comparing the man to the son I'd lost. Every time someone suggested starting a family, I wanted to scream that I already had a family. I just didn't know where they were. The afternoon stretched toward evening as they talked, each question and answer building bridges across the years of separation. David spoke about his childhood with the Kowalskis, about the love and stability they'd provided, about the way they'd always honored his adoption story rather than hiding from it. They used to tell me that I was chosen, he said, that somewhere there was a woman who loved me so much that she made sure I ended up with exactly the right family. I thought it was just something adoptive parents say to make their kids feel better. It was true, Evelyn said simply. Every word of it was true. As the sun began to set, practical considerations started to intrude on their emotional reunion. David had to work the next morning, and Evelyn needed to return to Kansas City for business meetings that couldn't be postponed indefinitely. But neither of them seemed ready to end this first conversation, this tentative reconnection after so many years apart. I'd like to see Anna, David said suddenly. I need to apologize to her, need to make things right. 5 years is too long to let pride keep you away from family. She'd like that, Joel said. She's been hoping you'd come home ever since you left. And I'd like to keep talking, David continued, looking at Evelyn with an expression that mixed hope and caution. About the messages, about what happened, about who we are now. But slowly, if that's okay. I need time to process all of this. Evelyn nodded eagerly. As slowly as you need. I've waited 33 years. I can wait as long as it takes for you to feel comfortable with me being in your life. They exchanged phone numbers, and made tentative plans to meet again the following weekend. David would drive to Kansas City to see Anna, and then perhaps he and Evelyn could spend some time watching those birthday videos together, bridging the gap between the boy he'd been and the man he'd become. As they prepared to part ways, David turned to Joel with an expression of profound gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you for this, for finding the suitcase, for bringing her to me, for you." "Don't need to thank me," Joel interrupted gently. "Sometimes the river brings things to exactly the right place at exactly the right time. I was just lucky enough to be there when it happened." But privately, Joel felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with luck and everything to do with purpose. For the first time since Maria's death, he felt like he'd been part of something truly meaningful, something that would echo through generations of a family that was finally learning to be whole again. As he drove back to Riverside that evening, the empty passenger seat beside him felt different somehow, not lonely, but peaceful. The search that had consumed his thoughts for weeks was entering a new phase, one where his role would gradually diminish as mother and son learned to navigate their relationship without outside help. At home, Leo was waiting with news of his own. "Dad, I got a call from the financial aid office today. Apparently, someone made an anonymous donation to cover my tuition for all 4 years. Full ride, no strings attached." Joel felt his heart skip a beat, understanding immediately what had happened. Evelyn had found a way to express her gratitude while respecting his pride, ensuring Leo's future while allowing Joel to maintain his dignity. "Do you know who made the donation?" Joel asked, though he already knew the answer. "They said it was someone who believed in investing in young people's futures, someone who understood the value of education and opportunity." Leo's eyes were bright with excitement and relief. "Dad, I can go to college. I can become an engineer. I can build things that matter." Joel pulled his son into a hug, thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A suitcase floating in the Missouri River, a mother's 33-year search, a ferry skipper's decision to do the right thing, and now a young man's dreams were secure. "Your mother would be so proud," Joel whispered into Leo's ear, feeling Maria's presence like a blessing in the room around them. That night, Joel sat in Maria's rocking chair on the front porch, listening to the river flow past in the darkness. Somewhere in Columbia, David Kowalski was probably lying awake thinking about birthday messages he'd never received and a mother who'd never stopped looking for him. Somewhere in Kansas City, Evelyn Drake was probably planning the words she'd use when she saw her son again. And here in Riverside, a ferry skipper was preparing for the next phase of his life, one where his son's future was secure, where he'd played a part in healing a broken family, and where the river continued to carry dreams toward their proper destinations. The current was strong, and it was carrying them all toward something better than they dared to hope for. The reunion with Anna Kowalski took place on a Saturday morning in her small apartment in Kansas City, with Joel serving as a gentle mediator between two people who loved each other, but had been separated by grief and misunderstanding. David stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the sight of his grandmother, smaller than he remembered, more fragile, but with the same bright eyes that had watched him grow up. "Babcia," he said softly, using the Polish word for grandmother that he hadn't spoken in 5 years. Anna's face crumpled with joy and relief as she opened her arms to receive him. "Davy, my boy, my precious boy." Joel watched from the small kitchen as 3 decades of David's history came flooding back, the smell of Anna's pierogi, the sound of her humming Polish lullabies, the feeling of being unconditionally loved by someone who had chosen to be his family. The apartment was exactly as David remembered it, filled with photographs and mementos that chronicled his childhood alongside his adoptive sisters. "I'm sorry, Babcia," David said, his voice muffled against Anna's shoulder. "I'm so sorry for the things I said, for staying away so long. I was hurting and I took it out on you, and that wasn't fair." She Anna murmured, stroking his hair the way she had when he was small. You were grieving. People say terrible things when they're grieving. I understood, even when it broke my heart to lose you too. They spent the morning catching up on 5 years of separation. Anna showed David recent photographs of his adoptive sisters and their children, nieces and nephews he'd never met. Family gatherings he'd missed, milestones he should have celebrated. Each image was a reminder of the connections he'd severed in his pain, the love he'd rejected, because accepting it felt like a betrayal of his grief. They ask about you, Anna said, pointing to a Christmas photo that showed his sisters with their families. Every holiday, every birthday, they wonder where you are and whether you're happy. David studied the photographs with the intensity of someone trying to memorize faces he'd forgotten he loved. Do they hate me for disappearing? For not staying in touch? They love you, Anna said firmly. Just like I love you, just like your birth mother loves you. Love doesn't disappear because someone makes mistakes or because they need time to heal. Zhao felt like an intruder on this family reunion, but Anna had insisted he stay, saying that the man who'd brought David home deserved to witness the healing he'd made possible. From his position in the kitchen, Zhao could see the gradual transformation in David's posture as the defensive walls he'd built around his heart began to crumble. After lunch, Anna brought out a shoebox filled with items she'd saved from David's. Childhood report cards, artwork, letters he'd written her from summer camp. At the bottom of the box was something that made David gasp with recognition. A small wooden truck he'd made in high school shop class, painted bright red with his initials carved into the side. You kept this? He asked, turning the truck over in his hands. I kept everything, Anna said simply. I never stopped hoping you'd come home someday to claim your memories. The afternoon brought another visitor that Joel hadn't expected. Evelyn arrived carrying a large gift bag, her business attire replaced by casual clothes that made her look more like a nervous mother than a corporate executive. The dynamic in the small apartment shifted as 3 generations of David's family found themselves in the same room for the first time. I brought something for you, Evelyn said, setting the bag on Anna's coffee table. I know it's 33 years late, but David reached into the bag and pulled out the stuffed elephant from the first birthday video. Its gray fur slightly faded, but otherwise perfect. Pinned to its ear was a small card that read, For David, on his first birthday that we can celebrate together. You really kept it all these years, David said wonderingly, cradling the elephant like the precious artifact it was. I kept everything, Evelyn said, echoing Anna's words. Every birthday present, every Christmas gift. I have a room in my house that looks like a toy store, filled with 33 years of things I bought for a son I hope to find someday. Anna wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her grandson connect with his birth mother. Stanley and Ellen would be so happy to see this. They always said that someday you'd find each other. That love like that doesn't just disappear. The conversation that followed was tentative but genuine, with Anna serving as a bridge between David's past and present. She shared stories about his childhood that Evelyn had never heard, while Evelyn talked about the business empire she'd built while searching for him. Joel listened to the family slowly knitting itself back together, one shared memory and gentle question at a time. I want to watch the videos, David said suddenly, looking at Evelyn with determination. The birthday messages. I want to know what you wanted to tell me all those years. They gathered around Anna's old television, Joel helping to connect the portable DVD player while the family arranged themselves on the small couch. David sat between the 2 women who had loved him from different distances, ready to receive 33 years of maternal devotion that had been waiting for this moment. The first video was difficult to watch, not just for David, who was seeing his birth mother as she'd been at 25, but for Evelyn, who was confronting her younger self's pain and desperate hope. Anna held David's hand while Evelyn watched her own image speak to the son she'd thought she might never find. You were so young, David said softly as the first message ended. Just a girl, really? Old enough to love you, Evelyn replied. Old enough to know that giving you up was breaking my heart, but young enough to believe the adults who told me it was the right thing to do. They watched 3 more videos, spanning David's childhood and adolescence, before the emotional weight became too much to bear in one sitting. Each message was a window into Evelyn's growth as a person, her increasing success in business, her growing confidence, but also her unchanging love for the son she couldn't hold. This is going to take time, David said as they turned off the DVD player. Learning who you are, figuring out how to fit you into my life. I don't want to rush it and mess things up. We have nothing but time, Evelyn assured him. I've waited 33 years. I can wait as long as you need. As evening approached, Joel prepared to leave the small apartment where a family was slowly healing itself. But before he could go, David stopped him with a request that surprised everyone. Joel, would you be willing to keep helping us? I know this isn't really your responsibility, but you understand both of us in ways we don't understand each other yet. And I trust you. Joel looked at Evelyn, who nodded eagerly, then at Anna, who smiled with approval. The ferry skipper, who had pulled a suitcase from the Missouri River, was being asked to continue serving as a bridge between 2 shores that were still learning to connect. If that's what you both want, Joel said, I'd be honored to help however I can. As they made plans for future meetings and gradual steps toward building a relationship, Joel felt a profound sense of completion mixed with anticipation. The search phase of their journey was ending, but the healing phase was just beginning. David would need time to process 33 years of missed birthdays and unanswered questions, while Evelyn would need to learn how to love a grown son without overwhelming him with her accumulated maternal energy. The drive back to Riverside was quiet, with both Joel and Evelyn lost in their own thoughts about the day's emotional breakthroughs. The small apartment had been filled with love complicated, painful, healing love that was learning to express itself after years of separation and silence. Thank you, Evelyn said as Joel dropped her off at her hotel. For everything. For finding the suitcase, for bringing us together, for agreeing to keep helping us figure this out. You don't need to thank me, Joel replied. I think the river brought that suitcase to exactly the right person at exactly the right time. I was just lucky enough to be there when it happened. But privately, Joel knew it had been more than luck. It had been the same force that had carried him through Maria's illness, that had guided Leo toward his college dreams, that had taught him to trust in the possibility that broken things could be mended if you were patient enough and gentle enough in the mending. That night, Joel called Leo to share the news of David's successful reunion with his grandmother and his first meeting with his birth mother. His son listened with the kind of mature understanding that reminded Joel how much Leo had grown in the months since Maria's death. It sounds like you helped put a family back together, Leo said. Mom would have been proud of that. Joel touched Maria's ring where it rested against his chest, feeling her presence like a blessing on the work he'd been called to do. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as David and Evelyn continued their careful dance of reconnection. But tonight, Joel could rest in the knowledge that sometimes the river really did carry lost things back to where they belonged. The child's drawing arrived in the mail 3 weeks later, a crayon masterpiece that depicted a family of stick figures standing beside what appeared to be a construction site. Joel recognized David's distinctive hard hat in the drawing, and beside him stood a woman with silver hair, labeled New Grandma Evelyn in careful kindergarten handwriting. Her name is Sophie, David explained when he called to make sure Joel had received the package. My daughter. She's 5 years old, and she thinks it's wonderful that she suddenly has an extra grandmother. Joel nearly dropped the phone. In all, their conversations about David's life, about his work and his relationship with Anna, no one had mentioned a child. Your daughter? I know I should have told you sooner, David said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and embarrassment. But I've been protective of her, especially after losing her mother last year. Cancer. It was like losing my adoptive parents all over again. The pieces fell into place for Joel with stunning clarity. David's isolation, his reluctance to form new connections, his 5-year absence from Hannah's life, it all made sense now. He'd been a single father trying to protect his daughter from further loss while dealing with his own accumulated grief. Where is she now? Joel asked. With me. She's been with me since her mother died. We live in a small house in Columbia, near her school. She's why I couldn't just disappear when you and Evelyn first approached me. I had responsibilities, someone depending on me. Joel thought about his own experience raising Leo, about the fierce protectiveness that came with being a single parent. Does Evelyn know? I told her yesterday. She cried for about 10 minutes, then asked if she could meet Sophie this weekend. I think having a granddaughter is more than she dared hope for. The weekend meeting took place at a playground in Columbia. Neutral territory, where a 5-year-old could process the complicated adult emotions swirling around her while enjoying the simple pleasures of swings and slides. Joel arrived early to help David prepare Sophie for meeting her birth grandmother, though he quickly discovered that children approached family complexities with a matter-of-fact acceptance that adults could learn from. Is she really my daddy's first mommy? Sophie asked, studying Joel with the direct gaze of someone who expected honest answers to important questions. Yes, Joel said simply. She's the mommy who gave birth to your daddy, but she couldn't take care of him when he was a baby, so she found him other parents who could, like adoption. Sophie nodded sagely. My friend Emma is adopted. It means your parents picked you special. When Evelyn arrived, she moved slowly and carefully, clearly overwhelmed by the prospect of meeting her granddaughter, but determined not to frighten the child with the intensity of her emotions. She dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, and she carried a small gift bag that she set aside without fanfare. You must be Sophie, Evelyn said, kneeling down to the child's eye level. I'm Evelyn. I'm very happy to meet you. Sophie studied her with the frank curiosity of childhood, taking in Evelyn's silver hair, her gentle voice, her obvious nervousness. Daddy says you're his first mommy, and that makes you my grandma. Would that be okay with you? Evelyn asked. Having another grandma? I already have Babsha Anna, Sophie said practically. But she says the more people who love you, the richer you are. So yes, I think another grandma would be good. Joel watched Evelyn's face transform with joy and relief. After 33 years of imagining her son as a child, she was finally meeting an actual child, her granddaughter, who was accepting her presence with the generous heart that belonged to people who hadn't yet learned to fear love. The afternoon unfolded with the easy rhythm of family time. Sophie showed Evelyn her favorite spots on the playground, chattered about her kindergarten class and her best friend's pet hamster, and gradually warmed to the idea of having a grandmother who owned hotels and had never learned to braid hair properly. Can you push me on the swings? Sophie asked Evelyn, and Joel could see the request hit his new friend like a physical blow. This was what she'd missed, what she'd dreamed about during all those years of birthday messages, the simple privilege of pushing her granddaughter on a swing. I would love to, Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. David worked beside Joel at assembling a small picnic lunch, both men keeping a careful eye on the developing relationship between grandmother and granddaughter. Joel could see David's protective instincts at war with his desire to give Sophie the expanded family she deserved. She's beautiful, Joel said, watching Sophie's delighted laughter as Evelyn pushed her higher and higher. She has your eyes, but something of Evelyn's determination in her chin. She's been through so much, David said quietly. Losing her mother, adapting to life with just me, dealing with all the changes. I don't want to add more confusion to our world unless I'm sure it's going to be stable. What do you think? About Evelyn? About building a relationship with her? David was quiet for a long moment, watching his birth mother learn to be a grandmother. I think she's nothing like what I expected. I thought she'd be cold, distant, maybe guilty about giving me up. Instead, she's just lonely. She built this enormous life, but it was all centered around a hole where I was supposed to be. Does that change how you feel about her? It makes me want to try, David admitted. Slowly, carefully, but yes, I want to try. The gift Evelyn had brought turned out to be a small photo album, carefully assembled with pictures from David's childhood that Anna had shared with her. But instead of dwelling on the past, Evelyn had left blank pages at the end, waiting to be filled with new memories they would create together. This is for you to keep, she told Sophie, kneeling beside her on the picnic blanket. Pictures of your daddy when he was little, and space for pictures of us together as we get to know each other. Sophie accepted the album with the solemnity of someone receiving an important treasure. She studied each photograph carefully, comparing the child and the pictures to the father she knew, tracing connections across the years with her small finger. Daddy was a cute baby, she announced with authority. But he's cuter now, David laughed, the sound carrying more likeness than Joel had heard from him since their first meeting. Thank you, sweetheart. I think you're pretty cute yourself. As the afternoon progressed, Joel found himself thinking about the generational healing that was taking place on this simple playground. Sophie was receiving the gift of extended family. David was learning to trust and love again, and Evelyn was finally experiencing the maternal joy she'd been denied for so long. Joel, Sophie called out as she climbed on the jungle gym. Are you someone's daddy too? I am, Joel replied. I have a son named Leo. He's 18 years old, about to go to college. That's really old, Sophie said with the blunt honesty of childhood. Does he still need you to push him on swings? Not anymore, Joel laughed. But he still needs me in other ways. Like what? Joel considered the question seriously. Like helping him figure out hard problems, and making sure he knows he's loved, and being there when he needs someone to talk to. Sophie nodded as if this made perfect sense. Daddies are good for that, and grandmas and grandpas too, I think. As evening approached, they reluctantly began to pack up their picnic supplies. Sophie had warmed considerably to Evelyn throughout the afternoon, accepting her into the small circle of trusted adults with the generous heart of a child who had been well loved despite her losses. Can we do this again? Sophie asked Evelyn as they prepared to part ways. Can you come to our house next time? I want to show you my room in my dollhouse. I would love that, Evelyn said, her voice shaky with emotion. If it's okay with your daddy. David nodded slowly. Maybe next weekend, if you don't mind a small house and simple food. I've lived in hotels for 33 years, Evelyn said. A home with people I care about sounds perfect. As they walked toward their cars, Joel felt the satisfying weight of witnessing something rare and beautiful, a family learning to heal itself, one careful step at a time. The playground had been the perfect setting for this first meeting, neutral ground where relationships could develop naturally without the pressure of formal expectations. Thank you for being here today, David said to Joel as they reached the parking area. Having you here made it feel safer somehow, like there was someone who understood what this meant to all of us. It was my privilege, Joel replied honestly. Watching Sophie accept Evelyn so naturally, it reminded me that love doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes it's as simple as pushing someone on a swing. The drive back to Riverside gave Joel time to reflect on the afternoon's events and his own evolving role in this reunited family. What had started as a simple act of returning lost property had grown into something much larger, a bridge between past and present. Between hurt and healing. At home, Leo was waiting with news of his own. Dad, I got an email from the university today. They want me to participate in a special orientation program for scholarship recipients. Apparently, they don't often get anonymous donations that large, and they want to make sure I'm prepared to make the most of the opportunity. Joel felt a surge of pride mixed with gratitude. Evelyn's gift hadn't just secured Leo's education. It had opened doors to experiences and connections that would shape his entire future. Your mother would be so proud, Joel said, pulling his son into a hug. Not just of your accomplishments, but of the kind of man you're becoming. I've been thinking about that, Leo said. About Mom. About the way she always helped people without expecting anything in return. I want to be like that. I want to use my education to build things that matter, things that help people. That evening, Joel sat in Maria's rocking chair on the front porch, thinking about the different ways love expressed itself across generations. Maria's love had shaped Leo into a young man who wanted to help others. Anna's love had sustained David through the loss of his adoptive parents. Evelyn's love had driven her to build an empire while searching for her son. And now Sophie's innocent acceptance was teaching all of them that family could be rebuilt, that hearts could heal, that it was never too late to choose love over fear. Missouri River flowed past in the darkness, carrying spring water toward the Gulf of Mexico and whatever destinations awaited downstream. Joel had spent his life on this river, ferrying people from one shore to another, but he'd never fully understood until now that some bridges weren't made of wood and steel. They were made of patience and courage and the willingness to believe that lost things could find their way home. His phone buzzed with a text message from Evelyn. Thank you for today. Sophie is precious, and David is an amazing father. I never dared hope I'd have a granddaughter to spoil. You've given me more than I ever dreamed possible. Joel smiled as he typed his reply. The river brought us all together for a reason. Tomorrow's going to be even better than today. As he prepared for bed, Joel found himself looking forward to next weekend's dinner at David's house, to watching Evelyn learn to be a grandmother, to seeing Sophie add new pages to her photo album. The search that had begun with a waterlogged suitcase was becoming something richer and more complex, a family learning to love itself whole again. Outside, the river continued its ancient journey toward the sea, carrying dreams and hopes and the promise that broken things could be mended by people who cared enough to try. 6 months later, Joel stood on the deck of Maria's Dream, watching the morning mist rise from the Missouri River. But this time, he wasn't alone. Evelyn stood beside him, her silver hair catching the early sunlight as she learned to read the water's moods the way he'd been teaching her for weeks now. There, she pointed toward a submerged log that was barely visible beneath the surface. Is that what you were talking about? The kind of hazard that could damage the ferry? Exactly. Joel smiled, pleased with her progress. You're becoming a real river woman, Evelyn Drake. Evelyn Ramirez, she corrected gently, holding up her left hand to show the simple gold band that matched the one Joel now wore. I've been Evelyn Drake for 62 years. I think it's time to try being someone new. Their wedding had taken place 3 weeks ago on this same ferry, with David walking his birth mother down the makeshift aisle and Sophie serving as flower girl. Anna had cried through the entire ceremony, while Leo had surprised everyone by composing a song for the reception that celebrated second chances and the courage to love again. The changes in all their lives had been profound but gradual, like the river's patient work of carving new channels through familiar landscape. David had returned to school to finish his engineering degree, with Evelyn quietly funding his education while respecting his need to earn his accomplishments through his own effort. Sophie had gained not just a grandmother, but an entire extended family, including a step-grandfather who taught her to fish and a college-age uncle who helped with her homework via video chat. The contractor says the new house will be ready next month, Evelyn said, leaning against the ferry's railing as They headed back toward the dock. "Are you sure you're ready to leave this place? Your whole life has been centered on the river." Joel looked toward the shore, where construction crews were putting finishing touches on the house Evelyn had designed for them, a modest but beautiful home that sat on a bluff overlooking the Missouri River, close enough to Anna's apartment that she could visit regularly, but far enough from the city that Joel could maintain his connection to the water and the rhythm of rural life. "The river will still be here," he said, "and so will the ferry." Leo's been talking about taking over the business during his summer breaks, maybe expanding it into a tourist operation. Turns out there are people who want to experience a real working ferry, who value the slow pace and the connection to history. It was true. Leo's business plan had impressed his professors and attracted interest from the state tourism board. What had once been a struggling operation, barely keeping Joel afloat, was being transformed into a sustainable business that could support the family while preserving a piece of Missouri's heritage. "And you're sure you don't mind having a wife who travels for business?" Evelyn asked, though Joel could hear the underlying question in her voice, the fear that success and love couldn't coexist, that she might lose him the way she'd nearly lost David. "I married a woman who built a hotel empire while searching for her son," Joel said, taking her hand. "I'd be disappointed if you suddenly became someone who was content to stay home and bake cookies all day." "I might try baking cookies occasionally," Evelyn said with a smile. "Sophie's been asking me to learn, and I figure grandmothers should have at least one traditional skill." The conversation was interrupted by the sight of David's truck pulling into the parking area beside the dock. Sophie tumbled out of the passenger seat, her backpack bouncing as she ran toward the ferry with the kind of uninhibited joy that belonged to 6-year-olds who knew they were loved and safe. "Grandpa Joel, Grandma Evelyn," she called out, using the titles that had evolved naturally over the months of relationship building. "Daddy said we could go fishing today if the river isn't too high." David followed more slowly, carrying the tackle box Joel had given him and wearing the kind of relaxed expression that had gradually replaced the guarded wariness of their first meeting. The anger and isolation that had defined him for years had given way to something approaching contentment, though Joel understood it was contentment earned through hard work and the gradual rebuilding of trust. "How was school this week?" Evelyn asked Sophie as they prepared the fishing gear. "Good. Mrs. Patterson says I'm the best reader in my class, and I made a new friend named Marcus, who has 2 dads instead of a mom and a dad, but they're both really nice." Joel smiled at the matter-of-fact way Sophie navigated the complexities of modern family structures. Having a grandmother who had married her grandfather after a 33-year search for her birth son was just one more variation in the endless permutations of how families could be formed. As they settled into their fishing spots along the ferry's deck, Joel found himself thinking about the changes the past 6 months had brought to all of them. David was weeks away from graduating with his engineering degree and had already accepted a position with a firm that specialized in bridge construction, a choice that felt symbolically perfect to Joel. Sophie was thriving with the expanded attention and support that came with having multiple grandparents who competed to spoil her. Anna had become a regular visitor to Riverside, often staying for weeks at a time and serving as the family historian who helped them all understand how their separate stories had woven together. "I got a letter from the University of Missouri yesterday," Leo announced as he joined them on the ferry, having driven down from Columbia for the weekend. "They want me to present my business plan at a conference on rural economic development. Apparently, our ferry project is being used as a model for how to preserve traditional industries while making them economically viable." "Your mother would be so proud," Joel said, feeling Maria's presence like a blessing on the family they'd built from the pieces of their separate losses. "I think she'd be amazed," Leo replied, grinning at Evelyn and David. "I don't think she," Ever imagined that Dad would end up married to a hotel magnate with a son who's going to build bridges for a living? Life has a way of surprising us, Evelyn said, settling into the camp chair David had brought for her. 6 months ago, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone, wondering if my son was alive and happy. Now I'm learning to fish with my granddaughter while my husband teaches my son how to read the river. The afternoon passed with the easy rhythm of family time fishing lines cast into the slow-moving water, quiet conversations about school and work, and the small details that made up their daily lives. Sophie caught 2 small bass that she insisted on releasing because they probably have fish families who miss them, while David and Joel worked on plans for improving the ferry's accessibility for elderly passengers. As evening approached, they gathered around a small campfire that David built on the shore, roasting hot dogs and marshmallows, while Sophie told elaborate stories about her imaginary adventures with a dragon named Frederick, who helped children solve problems by teaching them to be brave. "This is what I dreamed about," Evelyn said quietly to Joel as they watched Sophie perform her dragon story for the family audience. "Not the details exactly, but the feeling of belonging to something larger than myself, of being part of a family that chooses to be together." Joel understood what she meant. The family they'd built didn't follow traditional patterns. It included adopted children and remarried grandparents, birth mothers and step-grandfathers, ferry operators and business executives, and college students, all connected by the threads of love and choice rather than just genetics or geography. "The social worker was right about one thing," Evelyn continued. "David did end up with exactly the right family. It just took 33 years for me to figure out how to be part of it." As they packed up their fishing gear and prepared to head home, Joel felt the deep satisfaction that came from seeing a difficult journey reach its proper conclusion. The suitcase that had started it all was now displayed in Evelyn's office, no longer a repository of longing, but a reminder of persistence rewarded. The birthday messages had all been watched, the missed years acknowledged and grieved, the future embraced with hope instead of fear. The drive back to their new house took them past the old homestead where Joel had raised Leo, past the construction site where David's firm was building a new school, past the church where he and Evelyn had been married. Each landmark told part of the story of how they'd found each other and learned to build something beautiful from the pieces of their separate losses. At home, Evelyn helped Sophie with her homework, while Joel and David worked on the boat dock they were building behind the house. Leo divided his time between studying for finals and planning improvements to the ferry business that would honor its history while ensuring its future. As bedtime approached, Sophie made her rounds to collect goodnight hugs from each adult in her expanded family, a ritual that had evolved to include everyone who loved her. Joel watched her with Anna's eyes, David's determination, and Evelyn's generous heart, a child who was being raised by an entire community of people who had chosen to love each other. "Grandpa Joel," Sophie said as he tucked her into the guest room bed, "do you think my mommy in heaven knows about all our new family?" Joel considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think she knows, sweetheart. And I think she's happy that you have so many people who love you." "Good," Sophie said with satisfaction, "because I want her to know that even though I miss her, I'm not sad all the time anymore. I'm mostly happy now." Later that night, Joel and Evelyn sat on their back porch, watching the river flow past in the moonlight, both of them reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment of quiet contentment. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't pulled that suitcase out of the river?" Evelyn asked. Joel thought about all the moments of choice that had led them here, his decision to open the suitcase, to contact Evelyn to help with the search. "I think the river knew what it was doing," he said finally. "I think it carried that suitcase to exactly the right person at exactly the right time, and brought us all exactly where we needed to be," Evelyn agreed, taking his hand as they listened to the ancient song of water moving toward the sea. The Missouri River continued its journey through the darkness, carrying spring water and summer, dreams toward destinations unknown. But here on the bluff above its banks, a family born from loss and hope and the courage to love again settled into sleep, secure in the knowledge that some bridges, once built, could carry any weight the future might demand.